Welcome, friends. You are listening to the Mind Body Alchemy podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Miramontes. This is where intuition meets education in the realms of spirituality, fitness, mindset, and more, all to create lasting change. Welcome back to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate that you show up every week if you are returning. And if you are brand new, welcome, welcome. I hope you find something useful. And today is a great first episode for you to be dropping into because I have someone who I think is an amazing human being, someone that I love getting to talk to. And when you think about coaching and how coaches give advice, they listen, they hold space. One of the things that maybe you don't know is that coaches love having coaches themselves. And so there's something about being in community with other coaches that just really helps us grow and learn. And my guest today is that for me. She really shines a light on some of the ways that maybe I'm having thought errors, maybe I'm not doing my best, and really holds a safe space for me to figure my shit out. So I just want to welcome my co-coach on the same team, the Hooper Fit team, today to the podcast, Eileen Trujillo. Welcome to the podcast. So happy to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be with you. You know, I always love our conversations, so I'm excited for today.
We have the best conversations, y'all. We really have the best conversations. We always end up laughing and having a really good time. So I'm glad you're here. Today, we're going to take on a topic that is a little bit challenging, so buckle up for it. We're going to talk about taking personal responsibility. And now I know so many are going to sit there and be like, oh, this is the podcast I need. I need some self-discipline. I need to hustle. I need to get my shit together. And so you're going to be tempted to take this and go, I'm going to use it as a slap in the face and to get my sort of momentum back so that I can get back on track, right? And if you've been around for a while, you know we don't like words like get back on track and on and off the wagon and all of that, because the reality is your journey is going to be this long, sort of wavy, messy thing, but you're never really off. You might take the long route and that's okay, but you're not off track. So half of you are going to be like, woohoo, discipline. I need it in my life. I'm a terribly undisciplined person. Please slap me into place. And the other half of you are going to be like, wait, don't you talk about compassion all the time and like how to just let ourselves off the hook? Well, this episode is about marrying the two concepts so that you don't feel like you're off track when you're making mistakes, having a little bit of a messy time, and so that you stop quitting on yourself when it feels that way because you're so damn cruel when you make those mistakes. So we're going to teach you how to take some responsibility for your actions and how to do it in a very compassionate way. This is your Velvet Sledgehammer episode, so I hope you enjoy. All right, Eileen, what do you see with our clients, with the people that you work with personally, when it comes to this topic of personal responsibility? Maybe take the listeners through a little bit of a journey when it comes to how things start for people versus how it kind of ends up in the middle of their journey and how it ends, what the mindset shifts are there.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's so fascinating about just the human brain and our clients is most of our clients come to us with a very extensive dieting history, some relating back to dieting in early childhood for themselves. And so they've developed this mindset and belief that I have to grind hard, I have to follow this plan. And there's this very intense, rigid nature that has developed as a result of being a dieter, because when you diet, there's a clear way to do it and there's a way not to do it. There's no in between. And so initially, one of the very first things we spend a lot of time, and I spend a lot of time teaching clients, is like, yeah, but that's okay. Like mistakes, the messiness is okay. We don't need to ridicule ourselves for 45 minutes or 4 days because you ate 2 slices of the chocolate cake instead of having a couple bites that you thought you could do. And so some of it is unlearning the harsh rhetoric that is a natural response. And so that is a good amount of time for a lot of people, myself included. I was very great at immediately ripping myself apart and never noticing anything good, right? It was like everything I could add into the I suck bucket, like that's where it goes. And that's where it goes for a lot of our clients. So as our clients start to develop some self-compassion, it's like the pendulum swings, right? We're like, I'm gonna let myself off the hook. I overate, it's no big deal, whatever. I just moved on, right? And there's a lot of pride in that. And that is still progress, right? Like letting yourself off the hook when you might have eaten when you weren't hungry or you overate is important because we don't need to feel guilty about food. You just can move on and let your body do its thing and eat again when you're hungry. And so some of our clients get kind of caught in this place of like, I'm letting myself off the hook. I'm being so compassionate. It's no big deal, which is important. But if your goal is to truly change your relationship with yourself and food, there has to be compassion plus some inquiry for responsibility. And what that can start to look like is, oh, yeah, I overate, but why did I do that? Like, how do I want to feel? How do I want to change? What could I have done differently next? And like, what will I do differently next time is how the personal responsibility starts to come back in. It doesn't have to be as harsh as it was in the beginning, where it's like, I'm a failure, I'm off plan, I'm off track. It's just like, how can I do this just a little bit better next time? Like, I don't want to feel like this again. What do I need to do? And so I have a client who was living in the land of like, oh, but I emotionally ate and I'm okay with it. And I'm like, are you? And she got kind of really uncomfortable. And she's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you just told me that you emotionally ate 5 times this week for the same reason. Are you really okay with that? Or not, and she kind of goes, well, I guess I'm really not okay with it. Like, I'm okay with the decision I made, but I'm not okay because I'm like, is this an exception or is this a pattern? Right? Like, are you okay with this starting to look like a pattern instead of your exception? And she's like, yeah, I'm not okay with that. And I'm like, okay. So I'm like, I absolutely want you to be compassionate. If you overeat, you had more than you anticipated. Like, you're human, it's no big deal. It's not going to derail you. You're not going to be off track. It's not ruining all your progress. But if it's happening consistently, that's a pattern. And that's where we have to be accountable to ourselves. We have to say, like, I don't want to be the person who's still turning to food 3 to 5 times a week because my boss sent me this email and it stressed me out. And so I think that's part of the journey, is learning to go like, oh, well, like, I was okay with it. I was okay with it. And it's like, but if it's happening regularly, that's a pattern, right? We got to get inquisitive. And so that's one of the things that I really see in this journey is you start out a little bit harsh, you gain compassion. There's a little bit of time being spent in, I'm off the hook, I'm compassionate, I'm great, everything's good. And then there needs to be this next layer of like, where's the push? The push to get just a little bit better has to come back in with that compassion.
It's such a good point. And I really think that people, at least most people in my experience, cannot bypass any of it. They have to go through that part where the world just has so many expectations of them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be signing up for any kind of self-development, change of life thing, right? You sign up for these things most of the time because you're in some kind of pain. You're in some kind of like, I need to change this about my life. It hurts, it sucks, it's causing results that I am not okay with. And then when you join a program like ours, it's like, oh, well, stop being a dick to yourself. And they're like, oh, thank God. finally I can
It's like,
stop
I
this
finally have
nonsense.
permission to be nice to myself. Oh my God. I thought I was supposed to hustle and grind, right? That's the culture we've subscribed to. Go big or go home, grind or go hard, like.
Yes, exactly. And so it's such a relief to sort of release the pressure valve for a little while. And,
Mhm.
like you said, the pendulum just swings. It swings to the other side and people start getting a little bit like letting loose with themselves. But that is actually no better. Like
Mhm.
on one hand, it's nicer on the surface. On the surface, I'm not going to beat myself up anymore. I'm not going to say unkind things about my behavior anymore. That is all good. We're halfway there. But what I think is really missing for folks is that when you are letting that pendulum swing and you're eating for emotional reasons over and over again, and you're saying it's okay. When you signed up for a program to change, you really want the change still, but you're just like, I'm just being compassionate. And what ends up happening is a lot of frustration. Like, I've been compassionate with myself. I've been better. I've been noticing my emotions, still eating about them, but I've been noticing, like, why am I not seeing any success here? And it's like, well, it's not compassionate not to be accountable. It's not
Mhm.
compassionate to say, I'm learning, without saying, what have I learned and how can I remember to practice it next time I start to feel these feelings. So doing the work, the uncomfortable, gritty work of saying, I'm just willing to be disappointed in myself long enough to figure it out. It doesn't mean I'm a disappointment. It doesn't mean I'm a terrible person or that I don't have discipline or whatever. It's just like, I'm just willing to feel kind of bad about the results I'm creating in my life. And I'm done being on the extreme ends. I'm just going to hold myself to a higher standard without the outside voices of the world and the way they expect me to hold myself to a higher standard. It's with curiosity and then action, right?
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting, right, is as people develop compassion, right, like we get comfortable because it initially it feels good right away, but over time it doesn't feel as good. And it's the you want to meet that compassion with learning, right? And so I hear this a lot, like, I'll try again next time. And it's like, well, what are you trying? And people are like, what? I'm like, well, what are you doing? Like, if you're going to try it again with this like trigger food, a food that you get stressed out about, or dining out in this restaurant experience, like, well, what are you trying? Like, you need to actually do an action, right? That's where the change comes in. That's where the accountability comes in. And really holding yourself to that next standard that you're trying to develop, right? You're like, it's not like I'm going to try again with Mexican food and have no plan or intention. You want to have some sort of clear action where you can improve. It doesn't have to be like, I'm going to skip the chips, guac, salsa. It doesn't have to be extreme, but it's like, I'm going to make sure I plate the chips and salsa. And that's what I'm going to start with. And then I'm going to assess how I feel when my entree comes and then check in. Like, that could be you trying again, is being more aware of what's happening in that situation versus like, oh, I'll just try again with no plan. Like, you want to learn from each experience. And that's how you're able to develop that 1% better, the smallest thing you want to try. The next time your boss sends the email that tends to trigger you to want to eat the Oreo cookies, right? You want to be prepared to try something a little different in the spirit of improving, right? And getting closer to your goals and the way you want to interact with yourself and food.
Yeah, it reminds me of a coaching call I did just recently where I was talking to a client and she was talking about like, I know after, X number of drinks, I'm good. And if I have one more, I'm going to wake up and have regrets. Like, I just don't feel good. I'm groggy the next day. I'm like, okay, so what are we going to do about that? And one of the things that she said was, she's like, I just need to keep reminding myself that, I can only have this many drinks and that I don't need to have more. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay, well, how's that going to work? Like, you're going to be, 2, 3 drinks in, and you think that your brain is going to go, okay, I know that I'm going to have regrets tomorrow if I have one more in that moment. And you're just going to say no. I'm like, I can guarantee you this is not going to happen. So as we and then you just feel bad again. Like, I just keep trying and I keep failing, right? That's the story. It feels gross. And so one of the things I asked her, I'm like, okay, well, why, what were you doing? What was going on? She's like, well, my husband was gone a lot this week and, has been the last few weeks. And it was a great opportunity for us to just connect. And we were out and this is how we spend our time together. I'm like, okay, so what you're really looking for is connection, right? So her idea was like, I didn't want the dinner to end. So we just order more drinks at the bar. We just keep drinking because we don't want the date to end. And now we have an answer, right? It's not just about like, how can I say no to that third drink? It's more about what is really going on here? What do I expect from this experience? And what we found out was like, we just need to figure out a way to extend the date in a different way. It didn't even, occur that maybe we could switch to sparkling water and just continue to stay at the table for a while, or have a sparkling water in between, drinks and stuff to extend the length. Or, maybe we just don't go home and flop on the couch because that was the pattern. We just sit at the table on the porch and sit on the porch swing and spend some time together, just talking and visiting. But when we realize what we're really after, then we can solve for what we're doing. But if we're just like, I'm just gonna have better willpower tomorrow. Next time I go out to the Mexican restaurant, I'm just going to use more willpower. We know how that turns out, and and then you think, I can't take personal responsibility because I'm just someone who doesn't know how to say no to chips and salsa.
It's out of control.
Yeah, exactly. It's just out of my hands. Something takes over because you're just not aware. And you haven't done enough work to say, what am I really learning here? And, no fault of your own when it comes to not knowing how to ask the right questions, because who teaches us these things? I sure as shit didn't learn it growing up. You know?
That's funny. No, it's true, right? And I think it's interesting because sometimes we shy away from holding ourselves accountable because it feels uncomfortable, right? And it being responsible. But like the reality is like if you can think back to being a kid and someone at some point said like that was a really responsible thing to do. You beamed, right? Most people will beam because you're acknowledged for like doing the right thing. And really the self accountability and the personal responsibility is about doing the right thing by your standards, right? And so it's creating an opportunity for you to follow through on something that matters to you. And that's those moments where you build self trust, right? And a lot of self trust gets destroyed when you're a dieter because it's so extreme. What you're doing is just not reasonable and realistic to sustain. So then you develop the narrative and the story that I can't control myself around the cookies, the ice cream, the chips, the guacamole. And as you have the compassion, like, oh, I overate the chips and guacamole, well, that was a shit show. And you're like, but like, I'm gonna be nice to myself, I'm learning, right? And then it's the push, right? The push has to come in as like, well, what did I learn? Like, what could I try to do differently? And then when you name that and you have that plan for when you go back to the Mexican restaurant or you're at the Super Bowl party and there's chips and guacamole, you're trying again with an intention, and following through with that is going to be like, oh yeah, I can follow through on changing and improving. And that's going to give you continued momentum to keep pushing yourself just a little bit. It doesn't have to be extreme. And when you're being self accountable and self responsible, you're not beating yourself up over it. You're actually using inquiry to help you discover what action you should take, not a harsh rhetoric. You're just like, well, what can I do differently? What do I think I could do a little bit better? And that is where you start to have this balance of like, here's how I can get better. So I don't have to resort back to what I think is easier, which for some people, months into our program, 6 months later, you still kind of feel like dieting might be easier because it's clearer, right? Like it was what you knew. We are all prone to go back to the things that we know. But by actually asking, like, well, what could I try different? Like, what's the different thing I can try? How can I do this differently? And then following through helps you to continue to grow long after you finish any program because you're now the driver of your self-improvement.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's something that we see a lot is about the middle toward the end of the program. There's a lot of frustration and it starts to kind of feel like, well, it would just be easier if I could go back to macros or keto or, whatever nonsense happened beforehand. And it's like, well, if it was easier, then you'd have done it already. The reality is it's easy because you have enthusiasm, you have hope in the beginning, you've bought into the energy of starting something new, which is great. It gives us momentum and gets us started. But when you don't address any of the deeper things, any of the reasons why you keep making different choices than you said your values represented and things like that, then you're just going to keep doing that because no plan, no strategy, no tactic is ever going to fix your feelings. It's not going to change the way you think about things in the world that happen. It's not going to change how you think about your boss. I don't care how many vegetables you put on your plate. Your boss is still going to be your boss. Like that's just shit, and I hate to rag on bosses because we have an awesome one, but like
Totally.
but that it's so relatable, right? And I think everybody's kind of gone through that where somebody has treated them in a way that they didn't want to be treated, or a circumstance has happened that made them uncomfortable, and that brings up all the old thinking, all the old feelings, all of the old stuff. And so I think what you said about just kind of having a plan in place, a strategy in place, like here is what I'm going to try. I think one of the missing pieces for folks when that happens is, okay, I'm going to commit to trying this. It's okay if I fail in the sense that I'm still not going to beat myself up if I plate my chips and salsa and I eat them and then they bring out a second basket and I still just kind of find myself munching mindlessly. I still, get to count the win of plating my chips and salsa, but then I get to ask myself, why didn't my plan work? And it's not necessarily because your plan was too strict of limiting you to one plate of chips and salsa. It might be that you were thinking, I don't know when my food is going to come. Or you were thinking like everybody else is still eating and it looks really weird for me to sit here quietly. I don't have anything to say or anything interesting to add to the conversation or whatever it is. If you can just say, why did I break my own resolve here? Then you can take some personal responsibility for saying, I know I haven't achieved the success I want to, and it's frustrating and upsetting. That's fine, whatever. But here are the reasons why. I know why it's happening. So until you're willing to really dive in and say, why is this happening over and over and over again, without making it mean that something is wrong with you, instead, just with this very curious mind and this desire to solve it, not just the desire to know. It's okay. Yeah, well, I know I was emotionally eating. Problem solved. No, problem not solved. That's not the problem. The problem
That's
is,
not the end
okay,
of the story here.
yeah,
That's
problem
the
not
entry.
solved. What were you thinking when you decided to choose food over your eating values in that moment? What were you experiencing? What was the sentence in your brain before you shut off the part that says, do you really want to do this? Because there's always that sort of pause. There's always that moment. People love to be like, it was just automatic. It's like, no, it wasn't. There was always a thought. Our brains give us instructions, or there is always an instruction before we shut down and say, I'm not listening to this other piece. And that is where it's so easy to start blaming. It's the program. It's the diet. It was too restrictive. It was too hard. My coach didn't email me back. Like, I don't know what to do when I'm in these situations. This was a new situation I've ever been in before. It's so easy to just start looking for external things outside of us to say, I have no control, because otherwise we're back to beating ourselves up again because I didn't have enough willpower. And the reality is, it's always somewhere in the middle. Like, yeah, you can have a little more responsibility and exercise a little more discipline. But the way you do that is to talk to yourself differently. And the only way to talk to yourself differently is to listen in on how you're talking to yourself now and be like, oh, okay, I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with how I, have this permissive attitude of just go ahead. It's fine. We'll figure it out next week or something like that.
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting how you can join a program, you can have a coach, you can have a process, right? And you want it to work for you. This is supposed to work. And what happens is you still have to do it, right? Like we can give you every single tool in the world, every single piece of framework, encouragement, feedback, and question or accountability. Check in with me when you do this, but it's always going to be within you to make the changes, no matter what process you're doing. It comes down to your ability to take the action. And that sometimes is a piece where, every once in a while I hear people like, I need somebody to hold my feet to the fire, like be a hard ass on me. And it's like, has that helped you in the past? Right? Like part of it is you learning how to hold your own feet to your own fire for whatever that looks like for you, because you could work with us for 6 months or 2 years, but this is not a permanent relationship when you hire a coach or a mentor. It's about setting you up to take on that processing on your own. And so that part's always really interesting. It's like you can follow the guideline, but you have to do. And so you have to check in with yourself. You have to ask the question, like, was I okay with that? What do I want to do differently? Is that in alignment with the person I'm striving and trying to become? And you have to actually answer those questions, because is that in alignment? And then people are like, on to the next thing. It's like, wait, no, that wasn't. And so then you got to follow up. You're like, okay, well, how do I want to behave differently next time? Because ultimately, when you don't follow up and you don't get inquisitive of yourself, then you're disappointed you're disappointed, and you want to be disappointed in, I should have been further in 6 months. I should have, maybe if my coach was like a little bit harder on me and less encouraging or whatever, or the program told me exactly what a neutral meant, I would have done better. But really, it's always about yourself, right? So I had a call with a client recently, and she finally kind of said, like, I think I might be eating too much. And I was like, okay, tell me more. What do you think? Well, I noticed that I'm still getting a lot of pleasure from food, and I still really have this thing where like the chocolate solves the answer. And it's like, good. This is where your personal responsibility and accountability come in. Like, what is one thing you can do differently, instead of like sitting down at dinner and it being the like, oh, the day's finally over. It's like, what can you do beforehand that's going to help you not have food be your release of your day? It's like, oh, take a break before dinner. Like, okay, let's try that, right? Because nobody can change that behavior or that relaxation feeling but her, because she has to get her body to do that. Oh, nice long sigh, her day is done, and then she can enter her meal calmly. Like, I'd love to do it for her, but I can't, right? Like, that is on her, right? And so that's why the personal responsibility is so important, because it's what's going to help you continue to improve 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 5 years from now, because you're taking the control and power back with your compassion and inquiry together. That's where the change really happens.
Yeah. And that's what I do with the clients as well. It's just kind of like, okay, what is your 1% better? And everybody wants to think 1% better is stupid. Like, it's just not going to make a difference. And I'm like, listen, we can do a whole podcast on 1% better. But when you think about these small steps, everybody wants to take these giant leaps because, like, let me just get out of this as soon as possible. And then I'll just forget how awful it was and how much work it took. And then I'll just maintain it forever, which never happens. So, okay, what is your solution? And in your client's case, it's like, okay, well, maybe I just need to relax and take a break before dinner. Okay. And then why are you not going to do that? And that's one of my
Mhm.
favorite revealing questions. I'm like, tell me why you're not going to do that. And they're like, what do you mean I'm not going to do it? I'm like, tell me why, like, what is your brain going to offer you as a very good reason? It's going to seem real legit. It's going to seem very justifiable why you should just not take that break before you eat. And so even coming up with their obstacles and getting you out of your own head and just saying, okay, here's my patterns. Here's what I know about me. Here are the excuses that I know I'm going to make, and tackling those ahead of time. Then you can also say, well, how do I want to feel at the end of this? You think like it's going to be so hard. That's the imaginary thing. It's just going to be so hard to follow through on this resting thing. So, yeah, super hard, but the reality is, it's like the only thing that's hard is the way that you're thinking about it. I promise you, sitting there for 5 minutes is not going to be as scary and as hard as you think it is. And
It'll be awkward, sure.
yeah, you're going to have a little, like, are you that afraid of your thoughts? And the reality is, most of us are. Some of that shit
Mhm.
is scary. But, the reality is, like, all you have to do is sit there and listen to your brain tell you to do stuff that you're not going to follow through on. Like, you should get up and go switch the laundry then, if you're just going to sit around and wait before dinner. Or, like, your dog really should be walked right now. If you're not going to just
Mhm.
eat, then you should just go do something. Don't be, lazy or whatever. And
Yep.
if we can just say, okay, here's why I'm resting. Here are the excuses I know I'm going to come up with. And I'm just going to tell myself, I know I should do my laundry, and I will. But right now I'm resting. I know I should walk the dog, and I absolutely will. I'm looking forward to it after I'm rested. And so we can kind of really dissect where the excuses are and then say, okay, and how are you going to feel when you do this, when you follow through and you complete it? And, we talk about daily wins with our clients all the time, right? And it's so
Mhm.
fun to celebrate their wins. I love celebrating client wins.
For sure.
And they're just so proud of themselves for following through, because they now have the tools to see, like, why they weren't following through. So I think what you
Well,
did is
and
such a good thing.
once you follow through, right, it starts to build your belief in yourself, right? Like, oh, I can follow through. I can show up. I can do this. Like your question, like, why aren't you going to do it? Mine is like, what's going to get in the way? And they're
Yes.
like, what? Huh? And I love that question. It's one of my favorites, because like when I think about, I always envision like a detour when you're driving somewhere. What's going to get in the way, right?
Mm.
And you're driving to your grandma's house and they close the road. Like, you're not going to turn the car around and go back to the garage, put it in park, and be like, well, guess we're not going to visit grandma. You're going to pull up your map. You're going to find a different option. And yeah, it might take you 30 minutes longer or whatever, but you're still going to get there, right? And so that's the thing with figuring out what's getting in your way, is that this perseverance starts to come up where you're like, yeah, that, like, I kind of followed through on this, but here's where it broke down. Here's what I'm going to try again. And that's the momentum and the mindset that allows our clients to continue to lose weight long after the program, long after they get a foundation of our habits, right? And especially our core habits, eating just enough, eating without distractions, 3 to 4 meals. It helps them to be able to continue to replicate it and go like, well, that quite didn't go as planned, but here's what I'm going to do next. And then they keep adjusting and adjusting and proving to themselves that they're getting better. And We have clients who lose some weight initially in the first 6 months and pretty quickly, depending on everybody's dieting history is different. We have clients who lose a little bit and some that stay pretty steady because they're facing foods that they've been afraid of forever. And after they've built the foundation, you're in this land of practice. You're practicing your habits, you're practicing. But that's what's going to allow you to get better at anything is the time you're investing in the practice. But if you're learning an instrument or learning a new sport, right? When you practice, you're naturally asking yourself, how do I do it differently? How does my swing get better? How do I move to pick up the spare when I'm bowling? You're changing the scenario so you can do it differently. You're not going to shoot the same shot every single time and expect to get better. You're asking for feedback, you're practicing, you're asking yourself for feedback, like, what did I do right? What could I change? I recently have been getting back into golf, and it's not, I hit like 5 good balls for probably every 100, but no big deal. But like every time after every single swing, I'm like, did that feel different? If it was a good shot, I asked myself, did it feel different? Like what went right? I could feel the difference. What do I think I did? Like, oh, I moved my arm in a weird way. Like, okay, try to hold your arm straight, right? And that same thing goes for when you're learning new habits with food. Here's what worked, here's what didn't work, here's what I'm going to try. And that's the growth process, right? You recognize where you're approximating what you really want to be doing. That's your win. Like I got a little bit closer. And then you get to ask yourself the questions of what do I do next? And it doesn't have to be huge. It just is a teeny tiny thing.
Yeah. The teeny tiny thing is so effective because you can just see it, right? You can just
Yep.
see what you need to do. And if you can get out of your head and stop thinking that it takes these big, grandiose efforts in order to make any kind of progress. And you can really adopt the idea that small progress is progress. And the reality is most people that go through this dieting thing do it for 10, 20, 30 plus years. Like y'all are already on the slow road. Really? Like, do you think that this is, these little 12-week increments, that is the slow ass road. It is dreadfully slow. It is decades slow. So why not just give yourself
permanent hamster wheel, like these 12-week things or challenges and other diets are setting you up to stay on the cycle of dieting. So sure, your weight loss might be slow when you're doing hunger directed eating, a habits-based approach, but you're never going to get off the hamster wheel if you stay dieting. You're just going to be on it forever.
And no judgment. Ask me how I know. I've been there. I know what the slow road looks like. I know what it feels like to be like, this is actually faster than I thought. The scale goes down 5 pounds in the first week because I cut my carbs out, did all the things. And it's like, oh, okay. So now every single time I cycle back and I feel so terrible about myself. Every single time I feel like a failure. I feel like something is wrong with me, that I just didn't find the right diet this time, that I just don't have willpower and that I suck. And it really just feels awful. So take the slow road that you actually can see is the slow road. Let's be a little bit honest with ourselves and say, I'm just willing to take little steps and uncover some of my nonsense. I'm going to take responsibility for my feelings and for the way that I react to them. If I react by eating, cool, good to know. Like, let's not just bypass it and say, okay, well, I'm just learning. Let's sit with that and say, I'm disappointed that I ate again out of anger, boredom, frustration. I'm disappointed that I used the excuse or the sentence, everything is just too hard right now and I can't just think about how I'm eating. And I'm like, are you still eating though? Just because everything's stressful and hard, you still have to eat, right? Like it's still happening. So what can you do? Let's not think about perfection here. Let's not bring that to the table, but is it all or nothing? Really? And then usually it's like, well, no, I could probably still have breakfast undistracted just because I'm facing a deadline for, lunch and dinner or whatever. That's how we keep our habits. That's how we stay resilient through the times that feel really rough, is we get out of that mindset that we have to do it all the time. And we say, what is my best in this circumstance? What am I willing to do right now, the way things are today, instead of just being like, I'm just so overwhelmed. No, you're not. You were doing things.
To be fair,
sometimes a lot of them.
Right? Like, I love the overwhelmed one. I've said that one myself, for different reasons. But to be fair, like, I've never been so overwhelmed that I didn't brush my teeth before I went to bed. Right?
Thank you.
And that is a lifelong habit. And I try to like, it's one of the things I remind my clients of when they're frustrated that the habits just aren't clicking yet, right? It's like, it's been 4 or 5 months. Like, think about how many years your parents nagged you to brush your teeth before it became you've never been so overwhelmed you don't brush your teeth. Like, your parents probably invested 5 years in that journey of a nighttime routine with you. Go brush your teeth, put your jammies on, go to bed, right? And I don't have children, but I spend a lot of time with my nieces and nephews and babysitting. None of them ever are rushing to go brush their teeth ever. They're not excited about it, but they do it, right? And eventually it becomes what you do. And that's the thing when you're building habits, if you can embrace the fact that like this is going to take a while and that's okay because that means it's going to last. It's why we read that book, The Tortoise and the Hare, right? We read that book to children on purpose to try to teach them that
So good.
perseverance, the patience, the continuing forward will pay off, right? And it only doesn't work when you stop, right? Like that's what's going to happen. When you abandon your habits, you stop the effort, that's when it really will fail because you're not doing it anymore. But if you keep going, here's what went really well today. Here's how I can do this a little bit better. Here's how I can respond to this desire to emotionally eat. You know, nighttime snacking is a huge one for our clients. And I always ask my clients, well, what are you going to do after dinner? What is your plan? Because if you don't have a plan, the chips are going to be there and it's going to seem like a great idea at the time and a normal thing. And then you're like, damn it, I snacked again. I'm trying so hard not to do this. And if you don't prepare to do something differently, you're far more likely to revert back to how you used to do it.
Yeah. Mic drop. Amen. Love the brush your teeth thing. I tell my clients that all the time when they're like, oh, I'm just so stressed. I really couldn't even think about my habits. I'm like, so you're not brushing your teeth? And they're like, what do you mean? Of course I'm brushing my teeth. I'm like, okay. So like these just aren't habits yet. People think I let go of my habits. I'm like, no, you didn't. They're not habits. You're developing them into habits. They'll become habits someday. They will become pretty effortless and mindless eventually. But right now, if you're not letting go of brushing your teeth, if you're not so damn stressed and overwhelmed that you're not showering, you're not brushing your teeth, you're not, waking up, rolling
Combing
out of
your
bed,
hair.
and turning on the coffee pot without any conscious thought whatsoever, then these are not habits yet, but that's okay. They don't have to be. It doesn't have to be that in 6 months, you've got it. You've got it nailed. Let's just give ourselves like some ridiculously long period of time. Say it's going to take me 5 years to build these habits. And I'm going to work every damn day to the best of my ability without judging myself in a harsh way, while looking at and examining what I'm doing, what's going well, what's not, again, without that shitty judgment voice, with some compassion and accountability. That's how you start taking action in a way that makes real change. But we got to get there first. And that means dropping that timeline, dropping those shitty expectations, and just being your friend. Having your own back isn't bypassing all of your shitty stuff. Having your own back says, I'm willing to just be uncomfortable in my bullshit because this is what makes me uncomfortable in my life.
Yep.
Period.
And I think, another thing that's really important to remember, well, we have, even I had it when I like signed up to be a client of Leslie's, like, I'm gonna be the client in 6 months, I'm gonna lose 35 pounds. Want to know what happened? Did not do that. Not even close. Right. And so I felt better, but it ultimately, I saw an Instagram post from somebody. It's like, in 5 years, you're just going to be glad that you didn't give up. Right. And that was kind of the thing that I personally come back to with anything. Like, in the future, I'm going to be glad I didn't give up on myself. But with habits, right? I haven't made any single habit that's been long lasting for longevity in 6 months. Like, I've gotten practice with those habits, but you're either choosing your habits by intentionally practicing them, or you're collecting habits that you didn't choose. And that's the decision you got to sit with. If you're feeling like this is too hard, this is not, you either are saying like, I'm empowering myself to choose the habits I want instead of collecting habits I don't want to be a part of my life, because our lives were made up of a series of habits, for better or worse. So be in the driver's seat and pick the ones you want, and be patient with yourself as you acquire them.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. We're undoing lots of years of bullshit. We're undoing your family of origins habits. We're undoing everything you learned at school, through peers, through friends, through college, through all the things. All your life experiences are a collection of voices that create your sort of framework for how you live your life. And there's a lot of recognizing and doing that goes into that. So 6 months is just a blink. It's a blip in time. So yeah. Gosh, I think that's probably it for me. Do you have anything else that did we do it?
I think so.
All right. Awesome. Awesome. Well, if y'all aren't following Eileen on Instagram, make sure that you do. I will put her handle in the show notes. And if you have any thoughts or questions on the episode, make sure that you send us a message, hit us up, let us know what your thoughts are. If you want to argue about it, if you don't think it's true and it's a bunch of bullshit, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And that's all we have for you today. All right.
Thanks so much for listening. If you love this episode, do the cool thing like all the other folks and support the show by leaving a rating and review. It helps me so much more than you know. Screenshot the episode, share it on social media, and let me know what your takeaway was. Please tag me. All my information is in the show notes. If you have any questions or thoughts on this episode, ideas for future episodes, or if you want to work together, drop into my inbox. It's always open for you. And I just want to let you know that the doors for the group coaching program are going to be open on October 12th. So if that is something that you are wanting to sign up for, if you've been waiting to sign up for it, if you're ready to change your life beyond diets, beyond all of the bullshit that is in the industry, that is out there for you, and do something different, this is the program for you. So make sure you are watching for that announcement and putting it on your calendar. It is happening. All right, that is it. We will talk next time. Bye.